to the final episode in this year's Beetlegust project, Beetlegust 2025. But don't be sad that this is the end, because we have plenty more Beetlejuice projects coming up. I'm just going to have to keep working on Beetlejuice until it's done, because the timeline is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. But in this video, I am going to be wrapping up the Sandworm scene. I don't care how long the video is. I don't care how long it takes me to create it. This is going to be the final video over the Sandworm scene, where you can see everything put together. The sandworms, the sand, the door, the hallway, the lights, everything. And we're going to be starting with the lights, because I know to install them, I'm going to have to drill into the wall. And I don't want to put all this work into the sand only to have bits of sawdust and pieces of the wall falling into my hard work. Plus, lighting is stressful, so if I can get that out of the way and know that it's good, I can happily work on the other parts of this project without that worry. So let's get started. The first thing I needed to do was get everything out of the way, because I will be drilling into the walls. Before I remove the hallway, I need to take a Sharpie and mark through the hole that I previously created in the wallpaper. This hole is where the light fixture is going to sit, and I'm going to kind of have a fake bulb inside of there. The first hole I'm drilling is through the left side wall that goes directly into the area of my project that holds all of the panels that control the lights. So this is going to be a very easy install as far as the wiring goes. The other hole is through the back wall, where I just marked with my Sharpie. This one's going to be a little harder to put in, because I do have to reach into the interior of the project to add the light. But I am going to add my hallway back in place just to make sure I drilled the hole in the right spot. And just as I figured, there was a ton of sawdust that fell down, so I'm very glad I'm doing this part first. I'm using a long strip of LEDs for this project because I do want it to be lit up pretty bright. This is the only part of the project where I have to emulate outdoor lighting. This is supposed to be the surface of Saturn. So I need to add quite a bit of lights to make sure it looks a bit different from the other areas that are dimly lit. The first thing I'm doing is adding a long strip of foam board that's going to hide the lights from the viewer. And then I'm going to use what I call Dollhouse Band-Aids, which is just a piece of paper with a lot of glue on it, and I'm going to curl it over the edge of my project. It's going to be glued to the foam board, the edge of the project, and the top. And my hope in this is that the foam board won't have any way that it could possibly fall down. It's going to be permanently stuck to the project. I'm going to do this all the way across the front of my Saturn scene. Next, I'm adding a smaller strip of foam board that is going to be the surface on which I'm gluing my lights, because I want my lights to face down into the scene and not up towards the ceiling. I'm reinforcing everything with some hot glue, and then I can move on to testing my lights, because it's smart to test it before I go through the process of soldering and installing. So we tape these together and hook them up into the system. This is the testing pattern, and then of course we made sure that it could get information from our system. And then what I really wanted to test here is if one strip of lights was going to be bright enough for the entire scene. I had to turn off my studio lights to really get a feel for it, and it was just not bright enough for my liking. I even added the hallway back in to see what I thought. And I knew at this point I was going to have to add another strip of lights, which means another area where I'm going to have to hide the lights. But that's okay. I had thought maybe this would be an issue, so I ordered another strand of lights. It's exactly the same. I'm going to have to cut it a little bit shorter, but I'm drilling a second hole into the left side wall, and I'm going to add a second strip of foam board that's going to hide it. This foam board piece does not have to be as wide as the piece that's toward the front, because I'm going to be gluing these lights flat against the ceiling. So this one can be a little bit more shallow, and hopefully it won't be as much of an eyesore and people won't really notice it. So I'm gluing it straight to the ceiling, and then I'm going to be adding some aluminum foil to the front of this piece because I want to try to sculpt it into the ceiling. If I just have a flat piece of foam board, I think it'll be more noticeable. So I'm adding this aluminum foil in the angle and just kind of sculpting it into a rounded piece. And then I'm going to do the same exact step I did before with the Dollhouse Band-Aids, where I'm adding a strip of paper with glue. I'm wrapping it all the way around the foam board, the aluminum foil, and then this is what's going to help me blend it into the ceiling because it will stick flat up against the ceiling. At this point, I wanted to make double sure that I wouldn't be able to see my lights behind this strip, and thankfully they were laying flat enough against the ceiling. I wasn't happy enough with my transition. I felt like there were some gaps, and so I'm going to use some lightweight spackling to go into the sides where the paper meets the side of the project, and then I'm going to add it all over the front, making sure that it blends into the existing ceiling. Once that's dry, I am sanding it down just lightly, and then I can paint. Because I used a paint that was straight out of the bottle, I already know it's going to match my background color, so I'm going to paint both of these pieces that I installed the same color as the sky. Obviously, you will still be able to see that they are there, but hopefully by blending them in with all of the existing blue, they will not catch your eye as much as you think because there are going to be giant sandworms, a hallway, so many other interesting things to look at. While everything was drying, I permanently soldered these wires to the extender wires I need to go into the area where everything hooks together. And then it was time to install the lights. I thought I had prepped this enough. I sanded the back of this plastic piece, but apparently it is silicone and nothing sticks to silicone except for other silicone, as I recently learned from watching another craft video. So no matter how much glue, how much hot glue I put on this piece, nothing was sticking to the top. So I decided to remove the silicone casing, which Mr. Technology assured me would be fine and it would be okay. So I'm not quite sure why it had the casing in the first place, but I'm going to add this piece now back up behind the piece that's supposed to support it, and thankfully this time it's stuck in place and I didn't have it continually falling down. I know I'm not showing the soldering in this video, but I've showed it in several other videos. I'm getting quite fast at it, so I'm kind of proud of myself. And now that I'm getting more confident in that skill, I'm hoping to learn more and more about how to actually hook the wires that I'm soldering up to whatever makes them function. So it's a slow learning process for me. As I said, this backlight is going to have to be cut off. Luckily, I can cut these very easily at the copper connections. Removing the silicone cover made them even flatter, so they are going to be flat up against the ceiling behind the, what do I want to call it? The blocking piece, the piece that's blocking it from everybody's eye, and it's going to shine straight down into the scene. And I'm really hoping that this works because it's kind of hard to test until things are glued into their proper place. I'm going to be using one single LED for the light that's going into the hallway. I realized that the hole needed to be a little bit bigger, so I did use a drill in kind of a wonky way. You probably shouldn't use a drill like that, but I did make the hole wide enough so that the LED could fit inside. So I pushed it in through the back. My arm is actually going through the inside of the project and holding the LED from behind. And then I'm using my hot glue gun in the hole to basically freeze it in place. And I had to hold this for so long. For some reason, the hot glue just was not cooling off very fast, but in the end, it did get stuck in place and we got to test the lighting. The lights worked the first time. I am so happy. That almost never happens, and I was getting a little bit concerned about this line at the bottom. I couldn't figure out if it was because of my lines of lights, but actually it ended up just being the studio lights that were coming in, so that's not an issue in the end. I'm actually so proud of myself. I did all of the soldering and I didn't have to have directions again on how to do it. I did kind of ask a few questions to make sure, does this look right? But I'm getting more and more confident in my soldering, and when we put the lights in, they worked the first time. I did not have to rewire anything, so yay. At this point, I decided it would be a good idea to permanently install the Maitland's hallway. This is the hallway that has the mirrors on the side I created in the previous video. I'm a little nervous about attaching it. It's essentially going to be floating. So all of the support is going to be on the back panel, and I just really don't want it to fall off the wall. I don't know why, but I was almost even more nervous about this installation than the lights. The lights went comparatively smooth to what you're about to see, but of course before I can add it in, I do need to fix everything that's in the hallway. So I did repair the horse's hoof. Its leg was broken if you watched the video where I created the hallway. So I fixed that, and now I'm going to permanently glue the horse to the mirror. And I also added in the light, which you can see in the top left corner, and just a couple cute details at the bottom. So now I am going to try to install this. My original idea was to use this carpet tape, which I have used before in this project. The problem here is that the back is not completely flat. I wanted it to be completely flat, but it's not. You can see I added a strip of chipboard to try to make up for the fact that it's not flat, but when I tried to install it, the carpet tape wouldn't even touch the wall, because if you know anything about carpet tape, as soon as it touches anything, it takes hold. And the fact that it wasn't even trying to hold helped me know that it's not flat enough. To complete the illusion that the hallway door is floating, I do have to have the mirrors touch the back wall, and so it was easier for me to build up the back of the hallway than to try and cut the mirrors, because if I cut them jagged, it would just be a whole mess. So I added some more chipboard to the back wall, just so that there was less space between the back wall and the back of my project. And then I let it dry. And it did. It held its own, which I'm thankful for. I slowly moved the 1, 2, 3 block that was holding it in place and the single piece of foam board. All of this helped me get it to the right height so that the LED is right behind the hole that's behind the light fixture. Now in my head, I'm picturing moving this project around and this piece just coming unstuck. So I decided to try and hide a support underneath the hallway. I painted a stick blue. There's actually 3 of them. It's kind of like in a triangle shape. There's 1 in the center and then 2 at the back. So there is now some support underneath the hallway that I'm hoping you won't be able to see once the sand is added in. And then I did paint a little Dollhouse Band-Aid blue, and that is going to be put at the top of the hallway, so there is a piece that touches the top and goes up against the back wall. And because it's painted blue, no one should ever be able to see it. And then it was time to actually turn on all the lights, even the one in the hallway, and here's my reaction.
Ooh. What color is that? Oh, that's very yellow. Maybe it is sunrise.
Is it yellow? Looks kind of green. No, it's yellow. I don't know. I think I might like the bright white better. I think it looked... Oh, okay. Now you've got both of them being... Oh, that's kind of cool. That's really cool. It's very yellow.
Is it too yellow?
I don't know. I don't know yet, but I like it.
Good. I'm so glad this worked.
If you've been following along, you may recall that we had an issue getting the computer to send light information to the project when we were working on the first floor. So that's why Mr. Technology is so glad it worked, and so am I. So I am going to add all of the pieces back in place now. The reason for this is I wasn't sure if some of the sandworms being closer to the lights would make it look like just a little ridiculous, like they're more lit up than other sandworms. I didn't know what the shadows would look like, if it would interfere with the mirror trick, but in the end, everything looked evenly lit, and I'm so thankful for that, because I did not know if what I was doing would work. I was just kind of guessing, but in the end, it really, really worked, and I'm so excited with this space. It looks kind of eerie. I think it does look like something that would be on another planet. And it's really cool to see the door finally floating. And I think it's okay to have the shadows there because the door would cast a shadow as well. As I was taking things back out of the project, I was marking where they were sitting on the floor because I'm about to start one of the messiest processes I have done in this entire project yet. So now that the lights are in and working, the hallway is in, I can now start working on the sand. But first, we're going to have to mix a few things together. When I originally purchased this sand, I knew I needed yellow sand because literally Barbara says I'm getting all yellow because the sand is just getting all over her in the movie. So it did need to be yellow, but I felt like it was a little bit too refined. It was too yellow. So I'm going to mix it together with some other just tan sand, and I'm hoping it gives it a little bit of variation, which I think will look more natural, especially compared to the really fine art sand. The other thing I need to mix up is some yellow spackling. Now I have used this process before to make snow, but of course snow is white, so I never had to do anything with the spackling. It was already the perfect snow white color. So now I want to create some yellow spackling for me to pour the sand on top of. This way, if I have any bald spots, it won't be glaringly obvious. I'm not sure how much I need to mix up. I did buy an extra tub of spackling just to make sure I had enough. And thankfully I did. I had about half a tub beforehand, or maybe like a quarter of a tub. I also added a few drops of orange, which I think got it closer to the sand color. Word to the wise, this process will ruin your brushes, so I now have a jar and brushes specifically for working with spackling and building up some kind of snow or sand. I'm also going to use a plastic bag, which is going to be kind of like a piping bag, and I'm using a bead tool, which is going to help me get the sand in very specific places rather than just sprinkling it straight from the cup. The last two items I'm going to need is aluminum foil and a glue gun. And even though the lightweight spackling dries pretty well, if I'm going to be putting some mounds of sand, I don't want it to be pure spackling. It's going to take forever to dry, and if it doesn't dry, it has the potential for mold growth, which is bad, and we only want fake mold in the Beetlejuice project, not real mold. I'm going to be doing this whole project in sections because if I start adding too many things in, I'm not going to be able to reach the back. So I first glued down my aluminum foil lumps underneath the hallway, and I decided to protect my mirrors with a layer of paper because I can totally picture myself just putting a ton of spackling on the mirror on accident and being incredibly frustrated trying to get it off. So I'd rather just prevent that from the beginning while I get started. I put the yellow spackling into the plastic bag, which I'm using as a piping bag. This is going to make it so much easier to actually get it underneath the hallway. I'm using one of my already ruined brushes that's soaked with water, and I'm putting that over the top of the spackling. What the water is doing is essentially melting the spackling together so it has a much more smooth surface, and at the same time it's making it very sticky. So when I add the sand on top, it acts as a glue and takes hold to the spackling underneath. So while everything's wet, I am adding the sand on top carefully and slowly, and there's never adding too much. I can always take it off later. So I'm going to start with just the sand underneath the door frame, as you can see here. I tried to get it up against those supports in the back so it hid them a little bit better. It's not perfect, but I think it works, and honestly there's going to be so much in front of it, no one's ever going to see it. I let that dry overnight, and I wanted to test out if I could use my keyboard vacuum to suck up any of the extra sand once everything was dry. And it did work okay, although I'm a little worried that I'm going to ruin my keyboard vacuum because, as you can see, the very fine sand is coming through the area with the fan. But it did pick up a lot of it, and I was able to save it in this little container. So I'm going to do this a few times, but ultimately at the end, I'm going to have to use a shop vac to get all of the loose sand up because it's just not a very powerful vacuum. I had a couple spots where some foil was showing through, so I just added some wood glue and added some more sand on top. So it's a very forgiving way to do this. There's lots of ways that you could fix mistakes, but it just is a process that takes a lot of time because it just takes a ton of dry time to make sure that everything is completely dry, there's no chance of mold, and you don't just constantly put your hand in something wet while you're working. I'm now going to install the rocks on the side of the room. These are supposed to be up against the wall. Because these pieces are made from foam clay and can easily be cut or broken, I am going to add glue so that they do glue up against the wall and they glue along the bottom of the project. And I think this is going to be a much better way to support these so they don't get hit accidentally at any point. I decided to try adding a mixture of tacky glue and water over the top of the remaining sand. I've seen this done on many terrain videos where they're building things with rocks, sand, and dirt, and it just helps keep things in place so that it's not constantly shifting around or falling off the project. And it's just a brush soaked in water that has glue mixed in. I also went back over with a little dusting of sand just for anything else that wants to take hold. The more sand, the better. Now, I know you couldn't really see much with my hand in the way at the very start of this project, so you will see this process over and over again as we move forward. I am squeezing out the spackling all over the space that I want to create sand dunes, and I'm wetting it down with the wet paintbrush and then sprinkling sand on top. So I am going to show you the whole process of this entire room. It's going to be the same thing over and over again, but I do think it's really satisfying to watch. This definitely looks like some sort of forbidden icing, and I do think people use this material as icing on fake cakes, so that's why it does look so delicious. But don't eat it. It's very dangerous. It will hurt you a lot. It's not for human consumption or any living thing's consumption, just to be clear. I did find that using my old ruin brushes made it really hard to make a smooth sand dune, just because the way the bristles are sprawled out, it felt like it was very hard to get a smooth dune. So I found that after the sand was added, I could pat down some of the ridges with my finger because the spackling would no longer stick to me because it was covered in sand. So if you want a really smooth finish and you don't want to ruin another brush, you can pat it down. Then it was time to add the first sandworm. This sandworm is going to be kind of beneath the sand surface mostly. You'll see the top half of its head. I decided to boost it up on some aluminum foil, and everything else is going to be filled with hot glue. The reason for this is I really don't want spackling to get into any holes where it's going to have a hard time drying. I want every single part of this project to be dry. I also realized I needed to add a bit more to the body of this worm because it's going to be just underneath the sand's surface. So I added some aluminum foil back where the body would be. I can also go ahead and add in the tail. I'm starting with a big glob of hot glue on the base, and then I'm also going to add a little bit of wood glue between the tail and the wall. So I have two areas where this piece is being glued in place. You'll notice I'm starting at the outside edges, and this is so that I can work my way into the center and make sure I'm not cutting off any access to these outer pieces, because the more I get into the center of the project, the harder it's going to be to reach around and get to everything. And even though this process is tedious, it's really fun once I get to start burying the worms and rocks, and you start to get a sense that they really are underneath the surface of the sand. You are only going to see about 10 minutes worth of work on adding the sand into this piece, but please know that this was multiple days of adding a little bit, letting it dry. There's just an enormous amount of dry time because you don't want to be adding more sand on top of a wet sand area because you could be trapping in moisture, which again could lead to mold. So it's very important to take this process slow. Make sure you give yourself several days to go bit by bit and make sure you're really happy with everything you're doing and everything is getting completely dried out. I continue to be very happy with my idea to use the foam clay for this project because it's very easy to cut into, and at this point where I felt like the rock was sticking out rather weird, I could just cut into it with a pair of flush cutters and then add some sand over the end of the stone. And I do plan to add a little bit of sand sitting on top of the stones in some of the little craters that I created, but that will come at a later date. First, I'm just focusing on the sand that's going at the base of everything. It was now time to add the medium height worm, so I wanted to remove the paper so I could see how it looked next to the hallway. And I'm glad I did, because I did not realize that as I was using a fan to blow into this area and vacuuming things out, sand was getting stuck between the paper and the mirror, and I really don't want it to scratch the mirror. I hot glued my medium height worm onto the base and then added some aluminum foil around the back. This is going to make it look like the sand is bulging up around the worm's exit point. Here you can see how much adding the little markers on the base have helped me decide where I'm adding spackling and where to hold off, because it lets me know what needs to be glued to the base still. I do not want to have to glue anything to sand, which will make it very unsteady. So I think I'll add a bit of music for the rest of this part, since you know what I'm doing. I'm just doing it over and over again, and I'll be back when I have something new to add. This was so satisfying, being able to fill in the final part of the sand. This is definitely not the last step of the process, but just seeing the entire base filled with sand was really exciting, especially after how many days this took me to let things dry and to just kind of wait patiently to do the next step. Still a little soft. I let everything dry overnight, and then I knew I really needed to vacuum up the loose sand with something more powerful than my keyboard vacuum. So I got this shop vac and started to pull out all of the loose sand to make sure I could see what was underneath. And I'm so glad I did this, because there are some very distinct separations between the different sections that I worked on. And some of these were really hard to see because there was sand in the way. There was just sand sitting on top of these. So now I'm going to go back with the same process I've been doing all along, except it's going to be a very thin layer, only going over the cracks. And I guess I shouldn't call them cracks, because it isn't cracked, it's just places where the two different sessions of adding sand met in the middle. I'm adding quite a bit of water to the top of this spackling because I really do want it to blend in with the surrounding area. I don't want it to have a thickness of its own, except for if there's like a deep crack. I want it to fill all of that in. Then I can cover it with sand, and this does dry more quickly than the other spots because it was so thin. I removed the extra sand and it looked much more cohesive. Since there's already so much going on with the sandworms, the rocks, the hallway, I don't want to add too much to the sand area. I want it to be pretty desert-like, but there are two items that I am going to add in. The first one is going to be the camel that I created to replace the horse. I ended up using the horse, but a lot of you really liked the camel, so I am going to hide him somewhere, as if maybe he's fallen out of a door somewhere and just ended up in the sandworm scene somehow. So we will be adding the little camel. And then I recently received such a kind gift from Little Gretchen's workshop. It is a pair of shoes, and you know how much I love shoes. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you know that I always add a lone shoe inside of my project. Well, Gretchen sent me the most perfect pair of Beetlejuice shoes. I don't know if she meant for them to be Beetlejuice shoes, but I absolutely love them. I am going to put one of them in the sand, kind of hinting to the fact that Beetlejuice has been on Saturn fighting the Sandworms.
Hey, I've been to Saturn. Whoa, Sandworms. You hate them, right?
And then of course I have the matching pair of the shoe, and I thought how fun would it be to make like a little plaque that has all of the matching shoes that match my projects and like put their names underneath them. I'm not gonna make that in this video, but I was like, I'm gonna have this lonely, awesome shoe that Gretchen made left over, and that's when it hit me, because before I've really just used shoes that I've kind of found. So this is a special pair of shoes, and I didn't want to just, you know, not use one of them. Thank you so much, Gretchen. That was so kind of you, and I'm excited to add it into the Sandworm scene. Here's a better look at the shoebox and shoes that were sent to me by Gretchen. They're so amazing, and I actually feel really bad that I am going to take one of the shoes out of the shoebox to put into my scene. But watching Gretchen's channel, I know she would much rather me use a miniature for something I know that I'm really excited about than have it just sit on a shelf. So I'm still going to be using this box somewhere else, and I told you my idea for the other shoe. But for now, we're going to add one shoe into the Sandworm scene. Gretchen also sent me this really beautiful vanity set, and I don't think it works in the Beetlejuice house, but I am going to put it on my miniature shelf to have it for the next time I need something this incredibly gorgeous for a miniature scene. And here's a look at the camel. There's going to be some people who aren't a big fan of the camel because it doesn't really have anything to do with Beetlejuice. It has more to do with my channel, and you'll really only get it if you've ever watched my videos. Here you can see a comparison with the pair of shoes I made for the Beetlejuice doll. So they really are a perfect fit, and I just love this detail. I'm going to add both of these pieces near one of the red rocks because I figure if small items are blowing around in the wind, in the sand, in the storms on Saturn, they would probably most likely get stuck up against a rock. So I'm doing the same process I've done for the other hills that I've created. I'm adding the spackling, the sand, and well, actually I'm adding the miniature into the spackling before I add the sand. That way I know that the miniature itself is sticking. It was a little difficult to get sand up underneath the shoe, but I worked at it for a while and got something I was happy with. At this point, I was feeling like the rocks and the worms themselves were just a little bit too clean. When Barbara is on Saturn, she seems to insinuate that the sand sticks to you.
Oh, help! Barbara! Help! I'm getting all yellow!
So not only did I want to make it look like the sand is sticking to the sandworms, I wanted to make it look like there was some movement going on. For example, if these worms had just burst out of the sand, there's going to be some sand that's still kind of trickling off of their bodies. Once I did a vacuum over the residual sand, I realized I didn't like the edges of the sand stuck to the glue. So I shaved down some yellow chalk pastel, mixed it with water, and decided to go around the edges where I had applied the sand and glue. And at first it didn't look like it was sticking, so I added quite a bit, but once it dried, you could really see it. It made the rocks look very dusty, although I ended up having some of the same issues where I felt like it made a distinct outline. So what I found out I could do is go back with a dry brush and just brush around the edges where I felt like it was too stark of a line, and it blended it more in with the rock. So this was quite a process, but I'm happy with the results, and I'm sorry about the camera shaking here. I was trying to hold the camera while I was brushing away some of the chalk pastel. But I really do think it shows more movement and more life, or maybe more wind in this scene. Now that we have all the sand in place, let's take our final look at our Beetlegust project from 2025, the Saturn Sandworm scene. I started to take the video of the final scene and I realized it was still on the yellow light setting and I had never played around with the lighting. So we're going to do that really quick with Mr. Technology's help. We have yellow and yellow and white and pink. Ooh, the pink's cool. You're changing them too fast. Is that blue?
Yeah.
Okay. Do blue on both of them. Ooh, okay, that's not gonna work, but it's cool. Can you do a warm white, please? Okay. Can you do a blue in the back?
You said blue on the back.
Blue on the shorter row of lights. Yes, and then do warm white on the front.
Back to the way it was.
Ooh, I kind of like that. Kind of like the blue. Okay, can we do
Interesting.
a warm white on the LED that's in the hallway? Oh, there we go. Okay. Was that a lot or just?
That was a lot.
Okay, can you do it a little bit brighter than that? Okay, right about there. I think that's good. Thank you. After all of that, I settled on lights that I liked. It's a little bit difficult to show you in the camera because this entire video, the camera has not known how to handle any of the lights or the colors that are in front of it. But the blue light really kind of blends in the mirror in the back. I think it does the best for the hallway. And when it was yellow and I had the yellow sand in there, it was just too yellow. But it's really hard to capture on camera. But here is our final look at Saturn. Of course, I had to add at least one Maitland doll to the scene, specifically because this is the Maitland hallway. I actually don't think there's room enough for both of the Maitlands, but here she is. She's looking a little concerned. Thank you all for watching today's video. Thank you for joining me for this year's Beetlegust project. I cannot believe that the entire netherworld is full. All 4 sections of the base of this dollhouse are completely filled up, and I think I'm going to make a special video with an entire tour of the netherworld showing all of the accessories, all of the dolls in place with the lights on. So look for that video coming up. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you can see how this project, this Beetlejuice dollhouse, starts to wrap up over the next year. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one, which will probably be another Beetlejuice video. Bye! I do want to give a Beetlegust honorable mention to Flat Stanley, who's just kind of been hanging out over here. A few of you have noticed him in the corner of your eye, in the corner of the screen. He likes to keep us organized. And another honorable mention to this section, which I completely don't understand, but it's making it all happen. Hooray!